Hello, this is Tom with the Tractor Rescue Ranch. It is the next day, and I went home and did some research. These shafts, I apologize for that light coming from the window, but these shafts are called they're balancer shafts. So there's one on each side, and they turn in order to keep things balanced. And according to what I read, they said that they were common in some of these four-cylinder motors. It's just something that I've never seen before. But anyway, this side over here is everything's still fine, and it runs off of the oil pump gear. So my assumption earlier about that coming apart was probably incorrect. About that was the cause of these problems of throwing that rod, because this side that broke is just free. It doesn't do anything else, so it was likely still pumping oil as I was going. But there's that gear. You can see that gear just broke right off the end of that shaft, or the shaft broke off the end. Anyway, so I just thought I'd update on that. So my plans here is getting this tore apart to the point that we'll know on ordering parts, and we're going to have to take that crank and get it turned. I just don't think that the way that crank looks, I don't think there's any cleaning it up good enough to work for us. So anyway, going to be tearing things down and moving forward. There is the right side of the motor stripped down. What I usually do on a big project like that is gather up all the bolts, nuts and bolts, and different things. So I'll label this container the right side of the motor, and then I'll have a container with the bolts on the front and a container with everything on this left side of the motor. Kind of helps keep track, and when you're going through putting things back together, you know which container to look in when you're looking for parts. So I got all of the exterior stuff off of that timing cover and pulled that off. Just had a bolt in the center of it to pull out, and then it took a gear puller to slide it off there. So there's your timing gears. Okay, working on pulling this injector pump off, and the first thing you've got to do is get that motor coming up on compression stroke of number 1 cylinder. And so the way you do that is turn it over, and as it's coming up, if the valves are both closed, so you can see both of these have a little bit of valve lash in them, you're on the compression stroke, and that's the one you need to be on. So what you do, this timing hole back here on the back of it, this cover was over that hole, and it was bolted in with this. And so I don't guess you can see in there, but anyway, you put this in backwards, and it slides into a hole on the flywheel. And so that locks the motor in top dead center. You just got to make sure you're on your compression stroke. And so you turn it so that all the gears, the lash on all the gears are out and it's locked in there. And then you can see here, those timing marks they're not lined up completely, but if you I've got this pump loose, so if you rotate the pump a little bit, you can get them to line up. But anyway, when we go back together, we'll do the same thing. We'll put the motor on top dead center of number 1 piston on the compression stroke, and this pump here, you can only get it off 180 degrees at this point. So when we put this back together, we just need to make sure that those 2 marks, if the engine's in the right spot, you need to make sure those 2 marks are close there as you slide it in that 180 degree part, and everything will be lined up the way it's supposed to be. Now that is different. This is what you would do if you didn't have the front all off. If you needed to pull this pump off, you'd have to do this procedure. But you can get the timing way off with all these gears. So the gears going back together, the gears will have to be all timed correctly, and then that's how you time the pump. So there is, the pump is backed off there. There's the 180 degree spot that you have to have lined up. The only way your timing on this end of things can be off is if it has to be off 180 degrees. So as long as we put all of these timing back together the way it's supposed to be and get that 180 degree right, everything will be timed. Okay, I wanted to point something out to you that I found here. This is as it was when I first pulled it apart. That bolt right there was just about ready to fall out. I don't know if this motor had been rebuilt and it wasn't tight, or if that's just loose from the factory. Kind of hard to tell. So these fittings that go to the injectors, we're going to take and tape them up so that we don't get any garbage in them. We tried to wash things down as good as we can before we broke things loose, but we'll get them all taped up there so they'll stay clean. So I got them all taped up. They make a cap, a cap set where you can cap them off with little plastic caps, but I don't own a set of them, so this is going to have to do. So these push rods, I'm going to mark them so that I can get them all back in the same hole. I've heard both ways. I've heard people say that it's important to put them in the back in the same hole, and people say it's not, so it's no big deal to do it. So I'm going to just make sure it gets done that way. Okay, let's see if we can pull it off here. Okay. I've got a place over here on the bench for it. Boy, everything looks pretty dang clean, except I can feel a really big edge up there where that top ring stops coming up. So everything looks good, except it's probably got a lot of hours on it with that ledge that I can grab with my fingers. Just here in the bad light, I don't see any burnt valves or anything. That'll have to be cleaned up and looked at a lot closer.